Hey everyone, today we're going to spend some time and go over the strongest weapons you can use for the upcoming Season of Opulence content. Whether you're planning on raiding day 1 or just want to know your hardest hitting options for taking on higher power enemies, I've got you covered. It's very important to note that things still could change with the patch notes dropping tomorrow, but if things are adjusted, they likely won't be too drastic since Bungie has already given us a list of the most impactful changes in the previous few weekly updates. The spreadsheet I'll be referencing comes from Reddit user IamAdragonAMAA, and they poured their blood, sweat, and tears into making this PvE damage chart. It's truly madness. If you want to see the full sheet with the numbers for everything tested, it's in the description. Just be aware that on the spreadsheet I'm referencing, the first column of DPS numbers and total damage are affected by the 2x damage headshot multiplier from the Kali encounter, so all of those numbers are calculated for the raid. What I'll be going over is the normal DPS and normal total damage numbers to give you a better idea of the performance of each weapon. We'll start with primaries naturally and then look at your best options for special weapons, then heavy weapons. There are some very surprising things on this list, so let's get into it. Looking through all of the non-exotic primaries, hand cannons are clocking in at some of the highest DPS numbers of the traditional primaries on the list, with precision hand cannons being the best out of all of them. Surprisingly, rapid-fire scouts are showing some of the highest damage on the list, which I wouldn't have guessed in a million years. All other legendaries are pretty equal and showing the same DPS, except for Redrix's Broadsword, the high-impact pulse rifle with the Desperado perk, which can bump your DPS to up around 13,000, significantly more than every other pulse rifle. With hand cannons and rapid-fire scouts being better than the majority of other primaries, they still don't even come close to the DPS of submachine guns and sidearms. Yeah, I'm serious. SMGs and sidearms are absolutely insane. Take a look. Each of the 4 types of submachine guns completely blow all the previous mentioned weapons out of the water. Lightweight SMGs clock in at nearly double the DPS of a precision hand cannon and rapid-fire scouts, which absolutely explains why Recluse is so good. And this is even before you factor in the Master of Arms perk. But even more surprising is sidearms are also able to compete for the spot of highest DPS legendary primary with an average DPS just shy of 18,000, miles above any other aforementioned weapons with the exception of aggressive and lightweight SMGs. That to me is shocking, since I never once thought about pulling a sidearm out of my vault. I'm not even sure I have any left, but clearly they're very, very good right now. I bet there's probably a group out there that just got really annoyed with me sharing the secrets of the sidearm meta. I apologize to all 4 of you. Sidearms are just too ridiculously good right now, but of course there are situations in which they can't compete. They sound like a great option until you have to factor in range, so keep that in mind if you plan on taking them into the new content. Still very, very surprised at how strong they are. Now we take a look at exotic primaries, where things start to heat up a bit. The notable ones on the list include Malfeasance, which is a pretty good weapon against taken enemies only though. Cerberus +1, which has a crazy high potential DPS for an auto rifle, assuming your RNG spread is good. If you were able to get perfect RNG spread, you'd be able to reach impossible levels of total damage like 1.5 million as it's listed on the sheet. But sadly, it will remain impossible to really ever reach that as you need perfect bullet spread, and that's just so reliant on RNG that it's not even worth using, with its average damage settling somewhere closer to that of submachine guns. Outbreak Perfected with a Catalyst is also really strong, seeing a DPS of 8,500, which doesn't sound strong at all, but the more players that use it, the better it gets. You can easily hit more than 60,000 DPS with a full fire team of 6 players using the weapon, and the DPS continues to increase the longer you fire it. But even better than Outbreak Perfected is actually Sturm. On the spreadsheet, there are 2 calculated outcomes for the just recently announced buff, and both of them see a higher total DPS than a single outbreak. In fact, it's a higher total DPS than like 2 outbreaks. It'll likely be the lesser one at 20,000 DPS, but still, Sturm sounds like it's going to be a monster. Sadly, to get the most out of it, you'd have to pair it with Drang, and that eliminates a lot of DPS potential from your special, so it'll likely be something more suited to normal content and not raids. Out of all the primaries, submachine guns, sidearms, Sturm, and Outbreak Perfected are the strongest options. One thing I can't get over is that sidearms can average around 5,000 more damage per second than Sweet Business can at max spool. The exotic machine gun can't even compete with a legendary sidearm. Like, man, I knew that weapon was bad, but that is just disappointing. It's certainly not the only exotic that needs a buff though. Special weapons are up next. We'll start with the highest DPS weapon this time around and work our way down. The DPS numbers here will be accounting for the newly buffed fusion rifles as well as the recently nerfed Lord of Wolves. But even after Lord of Wolves got nerfed, the gun is still going to be one of the highest DPS special weapons in the game, being able to reach almost 47,000 DPS, with a 10 burst possibly raising it up to 57,000. This is still way more damage than the average special weapon can dish out, so you start to realize just how strong this thing really was. After the fusion rifle buff, Loaded Question is actually able to compete with Lord of Wolves, seeing a DPS of 54,000. Believe it or not, this thing can actually dish out more damage than Merciless, the exotic fusion rifle, can at max charge. Mountaintop is also right there with Loaded Question, seeing an impressive 54,736 DPS. Your next best DPS option is a rapid fire sniper rifle, clocking in at nearly 41,000, and just below that, rapid fire shotguns. Notable weapons that are also hard hitters include rapid fire fusions, the Chaperone, lightweight shotguns, Jotun, Arbalist, and also the rest of the newly buffed fusion rifles like adaptive precision and high impact frames. And just because I thought it'd be interesting to share, the worst special weapons for DPS include Prometheus Lens, Cold Heart, although at max charge it isn't half bad, Telesto, and aggressive shotguns. Heavy weapons are last, but certainly not least. Darcy turns out to be one of the highest DPS weapons on the list and one of the most reliable, only being beaten out by Prospector and aggressive grenade launchers. If there's not a crit spot that you have to hit over and over, grenade launchers are actually going to be a far better option for DPS than Darcy or Whisper ever could. Speaking of Whisper, while it may be out DPS'd by the weapons I mentioned previously as well as adaptive grenade launchers, it still remains one of the highest total damage weapons in the game, seeing 909,000 total damage, 200,000 more than Darcy and miles above any other grenade launcher. The Colony, Precision Grenade Launchers, Legend of Acreus, 1K Voices, and Sleeper Simulant with the Catalyst all kind of hang around the same 50,000 DPS mark, making all of them great DPS options if you aren't satisfied with any of the other weapons. One thing that doesn't have its normal damage listed here yet is rocket launchers. Going by the raid damage portion, aggressive rocket launchers with cluster bombs is the way to go, averaging far more DPS and total damage than any other rocket type, legendary or exotic. Of course, this will completely depend on the target and their size, as using rockets on a boss like Kali isn't going to produce the same results as using it on Riven. Now, its DPS might not seem like much, but 21% Delirium can really crank out some damage, assuming you're able to get 3 stacks of Killing Tally and have a long DPS window. Since Killing Tally doesn't disappear until the weapon is stowed or reloaded, you could be looking at around 745,000 plus DPS if you have a long enough window to damage, which actually makes 21% Delirium the second highest total damage weapon just behind Whisper of the Worm. Queenbreaker in the Marksman variant, precision linear fusion rifles, and every type of machine gun are also competitive in the long run for total damage, but don't have that great of DPS numbers. One thing I didn't mention that actually has some really impressive numbers is Anarchy. Even though it would take a lot of nades just to make the DPS worthwhile, it does have the highest total damage on the sheet, but of course to actually reach that would take absurdly long, since the damage over time electricity effect can last for quite a while. The weapon, while having the potential to dish out a lot of damage over time, is probably best used in tandem with a strong special weapon, like for example a rapid fire shotgun. You fire 2 shots of Anarchy onto a target, and then swap to your special weapon. And if you're wondering where swords are, the sheet doesn't have any data for them yet, but I'm sure they'll be tested soon. I think with the ammo reserve buff they'll be more useful, but probably not any better in raids unless we get a boss like Axis in Wrath of the Machine. I can see swords being pretty good in more endgame content after their buff, like the Menagerie, but for single target damage, probably not so much. And those are all of the strongest DPS weapons and archetypes currently in the game. Hopefully I was able to give you some sort of idea on the weapons to bring into the new season and into more difficult content ahead of us. Again, the spreadsheet with all the data in the description was made possible by I Am a Dragon, AMAA, and others on Reddit. So thank you to them for putting in all the hard work. He says he plans to update and refine the spreadsheet, so it might look a bit different from what I'm reading now. Again, you can check all the data in that spreadsheet in the description. Anyway, that is all I have for you today, guys. Tomorrow's Season of Opulence goes live at reset, and I am very excited to get to work. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great day.